Welcome back to another episode of the Sheepdog Mindset. This is going to be episode number 4. All right. I'm Nick.
I'm David.
Today, I know last episode we kind of went off what we were our structure topic because something came on my heart and I wanted to talk about it. And so that's what we ended up doing, talking about the security in general and why, why it's important and people don't know what they don't know. So today we're going to go back into the structure of security. I know in episode 2 we talked about the outer perimeter,
external,
right?
yes.
Yeah, the outside perimeter security and stuff like that. So today we're going to try to work our way in through those doors. So now we talk about open air. We talk about door security. We're going to talk about kind of ins and outs of teams, responsibilities, stuff like that.
Right. I think we're still a little bit left of Bang. We talked about statistics, and we wanted to keep the if there's a mass event or a violent event, we want it to happen outside, but they do get inside, so that's where we're going to pick up today. Is once we get to that external door, that first pinch point, or that first locked door or unlocked door. We talked before about why locking doors is so important. So I guess first thing we should talk about would be that actual door. Coming from I do a lot of audits on churches, and I've seen that we want churches to be inviting. So the best way to be inviting is to make sure that every door and every window is open and unlocked so that people can get in. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do from the security aspect. Obviously, we need to. If you've got 37 exterior doors, and I'm not making that number up, I did an audit at a church that had 37 open doors, which to me is insane. If you're going to have that, then that means you need to have 37 people guarding each one of those doors realistically, and that's a hard thing to do. So it's okay, I think, to have more doors open, but once that service starts, we need to start closing those doors, paying attention to fire code, but we need to. Once the mass ingress has happened and most of our people are in, we need to start closing and locking a lot of those doors and bring it down to 1 or 2 what we call pinch points where people are going to have to funnel into the building.
And some of these doors and what he's talking about, depending on the size of your church, right? I mean, 37 doors is a lot of doors in general, but we've got churches that have 4. But we got churches that have 37 or more.
Right.
Depending on the size of your church, and that's something that you have to consider. If you have a security or a safety team that or have 4 or 5 personnel on that team, and you're in a church that has 15 doors, there's no way that that's possible. So we have to start supplementing some of that stuff and understanding, where's our main ingress and egress points? Where do we want to look more inviting? A lot of times it's going to be that front entrance. It's going to be and most front entrances have an open air foyer or a large welcome center with church, chairs and tables and information centers or whatever the case may be. If it's a new visitor that's bringing kids, you have a different section for that. So we have to start thinking about where are the important ingress and egress points, and then on those other doors, what's the point of having a door, that leads to the back of the kitchen open?
Right. And that's a really common one we see. And the other is which direction are these doors working? Because a lot of times, like he just said, we'll see a door that's not typically used for ingress that gets propped open or something like that. And then there's a kink in the armor. We think that we've got things kind of secured and ready, and we kind of focus in on the pinch points that we've created. We have maybe 2 main areas where people are coming in through the north door and the east door. But on the kitchen or the kids area, we propped open a door, and therefore we have allowed the wolf a way in, like what happened at Uvalde. That was supposed to be a locked door, but it was not a locked door. So we need to, policy obviously is going to come into play. The types of doors is another thing. You've got type 1 doors, type 2 doors. You need to have, if you're going to have a locked door, it needs to be at least a good locked door. Now, you're not going to find a door out there that's unbreachable, really, not in a church. But buying a cheap interior door to replace a door that was faulty is not acceptable either. You need to go ahead and make sure you've got good hardware that's holding the door up, good locking mechanisms and things. At least something that's going to slow somebody down and make them make some noise if somebody comes in when they're not supposed to.
Yeah. So in exterior doors, and we know, like, fire code has to be a certain way in commercial structures and all that stuff. So you have to have your outward crash bar if you're going to have it locked or something like that, and that's fine. The problem is that you have those doors and they get propped open because people don't want to have to go around to a different door, or there's no, or they don't want to. It's just laziness. Let's just call it what it is. It's laziness. So if that's the case, go with a key card access system or something that if you're a staff member and you're doing stuff in the kitchen and you got to take the trash out, you take the trash out through the back door. What do? They prop it open, right? And if they do that every single Sunday or every single Wednesday or whenever that church is, people are going to notice or understand a pattern, especially if someone's trying to do harm or attack your church. And so we have to find other ways. Number one, to prevent laziness, hey, I'll be the first to admit we're humans, right? We are creatures of efficiency, and we want to do less work and get more done. That's the culture we live in. But as humans, our brains work that way to want to make it easier for us to do. The problem is that when we make it easier, we get lazy, we get complacent, and then that's when we start making mistakes and we leave doors open that shouldn't be open. Or what I've seen before, they tape the latch open. Yep. And it doesn't matter now. It's a freely open closed door, so it could be locked, but because staff members place tape over those latches, now it doesn't lock and latch, and anybody can come and open that door.
Yeah, the problem with that one is too, if you buy like an aftermarket product at Home Depot, go buy something that lets you know, maybe an alarm that lets you know if the door's been open for 5 minutes, or if you have an alarm system on your building and it lets you know electronically when doors are propped open. If it's a latch thing, it's not going to set that off. So that really comes into policies, and it comes into what you are going to create as your procedures at your church. As a safety or security team, we need to be doing checks. We need to be going and pulling on doors. We need to be checking windows, and it needs to be part of your routine. It needs to be something where it doesn't matter if it's raining or whether you're still going to go pull on every door. And it needs to be set up in a way that it doesn't ever get overlooked. If somebody's not there, it just needs to be on a checklist. The other thing is, if somebody is, and I hate to get into discipline, but if somebody is consistently causing that problem, it needs to be addressed. We're afraid to confront people, especially people in the church, especially volunteers in the church. However, if you just emphasize to them that the reason that this is important, a lot of people don't want to be bullied, but if they understand the reasoning behind it is, there's, for instance, one of the churches that I attended for a brief time had very hard time locking doors, and they had a hard time having adults out there with the kids when they were outside. And I wasn't even making the story up. I had to call them and say, hey, you need to get the kids inside. We just had a kidnapping attempt half of a mile from the church, and the van that did it, I hate to say a van, but it was, drove right past the church. And we've got 30 kids out there with 2 volunteers that are not armed. That's very vulnerable. And it was one of those God sends that actually happened, and that I happened to be a part of that call to be able to tell them this is why this is important. And that actually helped them to understand why we need to implement certain policies.
Yeah, we get a lot going back into, the number one, we say it all the time, you don't know what you don't know, but getting back into, what do people in any incident? It doesn't have to be a mass shooting. It doesn't have to be something where people die. It could be an attempted something, right? And even then, what's the number one thing people say? I never thought it would happen. I never thought it would happen here. Why here, of all places, right? So why are we waiting until then? And that's the main goal behind this, is we need to start securing it now and having those plans, as we talked about before, a plan to create a safer environment for not only our flocks, our families, our children, especially. The number one most innocent and vulnerable thing is a child. They have no means or understanding yet of how to protect themselves a lot of times, and it's just something that we need to start paying attention to, right? So when we talk about doors in general, right, we know sometimes finances are an issue, right? So people that want these high-tech security systems with keycard access, cameras, or a control system that they can have a main hub to control all the door locks and all that stuff. Sometimes that's not feasible. But as simple as anything else, every commercial structure has to have fire code. Fire code meaning that the doors have to lock, but if someone's inside and the door is locked, they have to be able to get out. So crash bars, making sure the crash bars are locked. That's a simple way. Going around and doing a check, a door check, right? And that's something that I used to do on Wednesdays when I would help the kids ministry and teaching, right, at my church. I'd take 5 minutes, walk to all the doors that I know were the doors that needed to be locked, right? Not the main entrance ones. There's a foyer, main entrance, but we have somebody there. All those doors that are supposed to be locked, go around, do a pull test, do a push test, making sure those doors are secure that nobody from the outside can get in without access cards or keys or whatever the case may be.
Have a team, have a group that does this and that's accountable for it, that reports. I like to one of the Christian schools that we work. I went and here in Texas they started a law now that all the interior and exterior doors have to be locked while they're teaching. So I went and I started pulling on some doors. And of the 30 or so doors, I found 4 of them to be unlocked, which is, of course, I'm not reporting that to the law. I'm doing an audit on a place. And I went and reported that to the staff there. I said, hey, I did an audit. I pulled 4 of the doors. It's not bad because I know last year it was a lot worse. And the administrator that I talked to, she said, well, yesterday it was like 80%, so they've made improvements. So we're getting there. And I hate to, again, I'm not calling anybody out, but it is laziness. Like Nick said, it's a lazy thing to put that security aside on the reality bias that it has never happened here before, so therefore it can't ever happen here. It absolutely can, and it's going to happen somewhere. So get those exterior doors locked, and then the interior doors as well. We have, whether it's a classroom or Sunday school or wherever where kids are present. Now, I'm not talking about the large spaces like the auditorium yet. I'm talking about your breakout rooms and your places where people go to have their small groups and things like that. There's other than breaker bars. There's other things. As Nick said, the fire code says you have to be able to get out, but not to get in. We're both breachers, and I can tell you that one of the hardest things I've ever had to breach was what you'd find in a cheap motel. It's a little C thing that just comes across. And the reason it was effective is it does what we call flexing a door. And when you hit a door, kick a door, hit it with a ram, and the door flexes, it's because there's not enough resistance, and it actually moves with it. And I'm not going to talk about how to defeat that right now, but what I will tell you is things like a New York stop that you go buy at Home Depot for $35 that you can throw up on that door in just a few seconds should the need arise will slow that person down a lot, and it will buy you time to get a response team in to deal with that problem. It's also something that's very easy to defeat from the inside. You just kick it out of the way if you need to get out. So if the building has a bomb threat or catches fire and you need to get out for any reason, it's not going to violate any fire codes.
Yeah, and I think and a lot of that stuff's quick fixes, right? But we know, I mean, you can, because of the history of active shooters that we have in the U.S. Unfortunately, there's all kinds of technology out there to help with solving those problems. And we don't want to get too far into the weeds of lockdown procedures just yet. But as far as we're talking about doors in general, right? So commercial structures having a way that we can lock. I mean, we've seen those magnetic locks, right? Mm-hmm. Those are good too. But I have also seen those defeat extremely easily.
Yes.
And I think if it's me, the crash bar is probably the best part, especially the 3-prong crash bar. So you have a center or a locking device in the middle, but then you have a rod that goes up and down on either side. Those are probably the best ones. And a lot of churches, they have glass doors, and we know if someone's trying to get in, they're going to get in, and we talk about that. But the only way to do that on a locked door is they're going to have to shoot through the glass, right? So what do we talk about now is having that little bit of slowing something down to give us time to be aware of it and also react to it.
Right.
So I think like having some sort of way of securing that stuff is key, especially the doors that aren't being used. And then now talking about, open air stuff. So if we talk about churches that have large foyers in their entranceways, and that's their main ingress and egress points, that's where we need to have the physical security, something that is seen, visual, somebody that's in uniform and armed, whether it be a security officer or a police officer. We see a lot of that. But then how often do you train on how to respond to it? What's the plan?
Right.
if something happens, right? We talk about even too training tabletops, having tabletops on how to respond to those situations, right? If somebody walks in through the front door and starts shooting, what do you do, right? So we talk about the physical security being as a deterrent. We talked about on the outside, right? So the
Right.
outside having one of those little cameras with the red and blue lights, something that shows this is being watched, right? Um, Bad guys, they don't like to be seen. They want to sneak in and then create chaos with the innocent. People that aren't expected, that don't have the ability to protect themselves. That's what they want. So anything that's going to point out, hey, I see you, i.e., somebody saying, hey, man, welcome. How are you? Nice to see you. What's your name? What are you, is this your first time? Something like that to say, I see you. That enough alone is something that we can give a deterrent. But also on the inside of having a physical armed security or police officer that has the ability to fight back,
And it
right? We
needs to be
talk
somebody that's
about,
willing. It can't be
yes,
somebody just a person. You can't have somebody sleeping in a chair with a gun on their hip. It
correct.
needs to be somebody who's willing not to just confront somebody who walks in with a slung rifle, but somebody who walks in a trench coat in the summertime. It needs to be somebody who can address any level of issue. You got to understand too that if we've already set up a level outside, we've already set up a resistance level outside, and that level is violated, that shows intention. That shows that they're there to do some sort of harm. So if somebody walks into your church with a long gun or with a carrying a handgun or carrying a knife or something that's pretty obvious, we can't get too caught up in what the response needs to be as far as verbal. Sometimes it's time to just take action. Now, if the problem is something less obvious, then we need to be able to approach. We need to be able to approach, possibly offend. That's not our goal to offend, but we can't be afraid to offend. The people who you're protecting depend on you to be the one to offend. They're depending on you to be the one to go up and say, "Hold on, I need you to stop right here. Your progress needs to stop with me until I say it's okay." And that needs to be something that you ingrain in the people that are in that what I would call middle perimeter spot. They need to be able to stop that. We didn't stop it outside, so we really, really need to stop it at middle perimeter.
Yeah, that open air before they get into a sanctuary filled with the what I hate to say, a target rich environment with innocent people just there, no way of defending themselves. We have to have some way of stopping it in that middle ground, that middle environment, just like David said, but somebody that has the mindset to be able to do that. So it's not just about being there, being present, being seen, but also having the ability to stop something if it becomes that, right? And so if when we talked about it too, it's like evil is going to show its face in the most inopportune time, right? So we talk about insecurity is we have certain posts, right?
Right.
Or certain areas of responsibility, right? A post would be like the kids' environment or the kids' ministry areas where the kids daycare
Check-in
and all that.
station.
Right. So that a post is something you don't leave no matter what. You hear gunfire and another, and we'll get into this later on, but an area of responsibility would be somebody that's in that open air environment. Like their area is that open air environment to go back and forth between the ingress and egress points that are not secure, that are not locked. It's their job to be seen and their job to keep an eye out for any issues or problems.
Right.
Or it could be that you have staff, and here's part of the plan, right? Do you have staff that are trained in at least understanding if something doesn't look right to say something and say something to somebody that does have the ability, i.e., an actual licensed commissioned security officer, right? That what we talk about with the company is that somebody that has the authority that can actually confront and stop somebody
Right.
in order to check and vet them in order to let them in. Now, we don't do this to everybody, we know that, but we do it to somebody that person that has the little hairs
That
on the
don't
back of
look
your
right.
neck. Yeah, the one that's got your hairs on the back of your neck standing up, right? And you can absolutely train ushers and greeters and all of that by having a simple meeting.
That's where
And
God can use people that you may not even expect.
yeah,
And again, I'm not calling out people by name, but one of our churches has a 3-time convicted felon, tattooed up from prison. He's just got that hard look about him. And I'll be honest, I judged him right off the bat. I said, we need to watch this guy. They said, no, that guy's good. He's legit. And it took a few weeks before I was warmed up enough to go up and actually introduce myself and apologize to him for judging him. And after a conversation with him, I was like, I really, really wish that you didn't have a record because, man, I could so use you. You are such a good man of Christ. He was a born again. And his testimony was so strong that he could have been a huge asset. So what did we do? We made him a huge asset. He cannot carry a firearm. However, what Nick just said, the see and report, he was one of those guys who obviously could be aggressive if he needed to be. He just couldn't have a firearm. So he was in that type of middle perimeter post where he would actually go up and introduce himself to people. And if you look at what we do two things. We protect people with a piece of steel, with a projectile, with a firearm, and then we're disciples. And honestly, that's the more important part of what we do. And he had that ability. So I think we mentioned in an earlier episode, right down to the cockroaches in the room, everybody has a job. That job doesn't necessarily have to be always a person who is yoked, wearing a uniform and marksman, all that stuff. It does need to be somebody that has the ability, though, to be aggressive if need be and be controlled enough to control that aggression.
Yeah.
They need to be able to walk up to people and have somebody spit in their face and not just lay them out. They need to have the ability to approach.
You say that, and I know exactly who you're talking about, and I don't have a question in my mind that, armed or not, he's going to put himself in between
100%.
that evil and the innocence and sacrifice himself to save others. I know exactly that, and that's exactly right. And then that's part of that mindset, right? That's part of why we're doing this, and to get people to think outside the box, and that there's always something you could be doing, no matter what. If you're licensed, if you're not, but if you have that will and that feeling of that duty to honor, to protect others and to protect the church, to protect the innocent, you can absolutely find a job and something to do using your gifts given by God in order to help protect everyone, to protect the church, and to get into, what our previous episode, getting into creating a safe environment in order to help others find Jesus and follow Christ in order to get to where they need to get in order to get to heaven, and that's to be delivered. And that's the main focus and the goal. And I think that sometimes we, again, get into that complacency of having open concept of inviting everyone and anyone into the church, right? But understand that this church is your home, right? Your families are there, your kids are there, your friends are there, your loved ones. You care about the church. It's like, your church family, we call it. That's your family. You don't just invite anyone and everyone into your house without trying to vet a little bit about them.
Right.
I'd never invite some of those guys that come and knock on my door trying to sell me stuff into my house.
Right. And if I do vet somebody into the house, does not mean I've vetted them into the back bedrooms. There's again these concentric circles of protection that we use. And just because somebody is allowed the ability to come into the church, like the kids area, for instance, a lot of our churches are like, if you don't have kids here, unless you're being given a tour by one of our officers, you have no business passing our check-in station. And that's an absolute fact. I can tell you one of the safest places I've ever felt in my life was the kids area of Sutherland Springs, Texas. When we went down there we went down there for their last service that they did, and of course they treated us really well. You want to talk about Fort Knox? I bet their bank didn't have security on their vault that this church had on their kids. It was so impressive, and I was fortunate enough to be escorted by their security back there to see the measures they put in place. But I honestly believe that I could not figure out a way to get in there, and I know a lot about how to break into a place like that. I couldn't get in.
And that's funny that you say that, because here's the other issue, and this is why we're trying to get this information out there to you guys, right? They took those steps because of what happened.
Because they had one of the largest mass.
Now imagine if they had taken those steps prior to that happening, right? If they had the forethought to be like, you know what, we're not going to change something when something happens. We're going to be prepared for when something happens, and then we're going to stop it. Right. And having that mindset, that mentality of, I'm not going to wait till when it happens. I'm going to be prepared now.
Right.
And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Good for us. But when it does, we are going to be 100% ready. And that's 100% behind what we are doing here and trying to put this information out here, right? So if we talk about outer perimeter, visualization, being able to, and having a way to communicate, we'll get into communication at another episode, but getting into a way to say, hey, I see something that doesn't seem right. Hey, heads up. right? And now getting to the doors, right? If this person all of a sudden goes, instead of going through the main egress and ingress, right? And we're just kind of put this into your mind in the scenario, right? This person makes it past, the outer perimeter or the outer security measures, right? However, some way, maybe they just don't look as suspicious, right? Hey, just, there's a guy, he's kind of driving around the parking lot, not sure what he's doing. Oh, wait, he's parking. All right, maybe he's going to go into church. Just FYI, this is what he looks like. Cool. Right. And then you have guys that are in the foyer and they've already hazed. This is kind of something weird. Just keep an eye out. And he starts making his way towards the building. But then all of a sudden he takes a different route and he goes to the back, right? Do you have something in place to meet him there? Do you have a plan? Are your doors locked to where the only way he can get into your building is through those main entrances and egress points, ingress and egress points, that you have somebody in uniform there that can greet him, or somebody that has the ability and the mindset to do something if that something else happens? Do you have that set in place, or are all your doors locked and now he disappears into the church somewhere?
That's a horrible feeling.
Oh man, and now you have no way. And this is what I'm talking about. This is just a scenario that's a very real possibility and happens probably daily that you don't even know.
Right.
For those that have an open door concept or an open door policy thing where no door is locked, right? Or have somebody that's a staff member that props doors open, especially in a kids area. I know we have churches where the whole back half of the building is nothing but a kids area. Like, you have one person or two people posted in that area, maybe, or you have some people that have some awareness, maybe, or do you? And are those doors locked? Are they secured, or are they open? Can that guy just walk right in and go and snatch a kid? Can he walk right in and go and start hurting people, right? I understand this is extreme. I do. But this is the way we think. This is the way that we are trying to prepare people, because it's a possibility. Not only can it happen, but it has happened. It already has happened multiple times in this country. So why are we not being prepared for it?
And it's going to keep happening. The thinking this way, a lot of people would consider you paranoid, or I don't feel that way at all. I slept great last night. It's not paranoid, it's preparation, and it's just taking your head out of the sand and understanding that this is the way the world is. I talked before about military service, and I didn't serve a day in the military, but I sure am glad somebody did, and Nick did, and from those that served that I've spoken with, we are so in our bubble. We are so wrapped up in our little bubble of where the biggest problem we have is that our Starbucks went up 20 cents. And is that really a big problem? No, what a big problem is that there are children being beheaded in other countries for being Christians and things like that. That's a real problem. And we can't even fathom that. It seems like a fairy tale to us. But it is reality on this planet, and it is a reality in this country in the coming years. And I don't want that to happen, but it is what's coming. So what we're doing is trying to prepare you for this, and hardening up your location and having a preparation plan. It's going to have to happen really fast. And if you put it together too quickly, it's not going to be effective. So it's time to understand, if we knew that there was a storm coming, we would start boarding up the windows. It's time to start preparing for this. And it's not paranoia. It's actually very well received by most people. And those who would poke fun at you and make fun of you and say that you're a prepper and that, who cares? I guarantee you they're going to stand behind you on the day that they need to.
Or come and knock on your door.
Yeah.
Hey, you got an extra room.
They're going to be asking. They're going to be asking for your help, and we talk about the philosophy of the sheepdog. People might joke at us, and they might, we have the same look as a wolf. But when the wolf actually comes to call, they will stand behind you, and they will. That's the day. And the next day, they may make fun of you again, but who cares? That's not your job. Your job is not to be admired or paid. It's your job is to protect, and that's the gift that God gave you, and that's the gift that you're going to use. So I know if I'm sliding off on the weeds, but we get a little passionate about this. On the topic of those doors, get the doors, create the policies, make sure that you've got good doors, make sure that they're locked, make sure they're at least going to buy time for an armed and willing respondent to get there, and get the right personnel in the right places. Get up there, speak with people, talk to strangers. It's what we're here to do. It's the whole reason we're at church. It's my favorite part is the people watch and kind of go through their stories. Look for what doesn't look right. Nick just talked about it. You can see if you really pay attention, intuition is a gift from God. We don't trust intuition here in the United States because of reality bias, but you should trust your intuition. And I think I've heard Nick say this 100 times since we started this podcast. If you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, you get to save the day. So trust that. Get the right people in the right places.
Yeah.
What about these open spaces? What about the
So open spaces, right? That's a big open air environment, right? If I have somebody posted there that's an armed, willing person to do that, I can have somebody who's willing to step in that between the innocents and the people that are trying to hear the word of God and through Jesus, come to Jesus, through that, come to God, and everything else. What did we say the last couple of episodes? We got to create a barrier between the distraction and those that are trying to hear the word. So by having somebody in an open air environment, we can absolutely come in and create a barrier, right? So if said unknown person comes in there, if you have greeters, if you have other people, right, or you have a uniformed person, we now create that barrier by, hey, how are you? What's your name? What are you doing here? And having the mindset, and this goes in, we can go into some of the training and what we do to our officers on another episode of how to scan and what we're looking for as we're talking, right? I'm still polite. I am still courteous. I am still inviting, but I have a plan, right? We can talk about that later, but it's an open air environment. If we have somebody coming in an open air environment, if it's not a target rich open air environment, we have a little bit of time and kind of a buffer to help kind of mitigate some of this stuff, or at least find out and vet. If it's a target rich environment where church maybe hasn't started yet and you have a lot of people getting coffee or talking or other stuff, or maybe church just let out, right? And now we need to create more than just one barrier. What I mean by that is, if you have other options, do you have a security team? Do you have others that can come over and assist you? Do you have others that, and I don't want to get too much into responding to a deadly threat just yet.
Okay.
This is just trying to mitigate some of the creating another security barrier, basically. Because if we get into an active shooter response, I mean, we're going to be here a lot longer, right? So that's a whole other ball game when it comes to that, and responding deadly threat with a deadly threat. So we have to now just create those barriers for now. We're going again. You guys keep tuning in. We're going to give you more and more and more. We're trying to building blocks, right? Crawl, walk, run, and I'm trying to get to that point. But in an open air environment, to create a barrier is the most important, because I don't want them to get past me into that target rich environment until that person that seems to have people's hair on standing on end vetted. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. And we've had that before. We've had guys that were concerned, that have come to church, and, maybe there's a mental health issue, or maybe there's some other kind of issue going on that isn't understood yet because they're new. We need to have a way to vet that and to understand and make sure that it isn't going to be a problem. But it also, if they get past that point, then we're going to have eyes on them. We're going to have somebody that's going to keep an eye on that person just in case. And we can get into that when we get into the sanctuary about sitting where and what the jobs and responsibilities are. When we talk about security or safety teams, having somebody assigned to somebody just because of whatever reason, right? Which I believe was a part of what happened at West Freeway, but it wasn't quite planned. It wasn't trained. It wasn't planned. But even still, we can get into that stuff later on. For the open air, the number one thing obviously is the doors. We got to have that. We got to have that plan and that policy in place. If they make it past that point, we got to have a buffer. We got to have a way to slow that person down in order to vet them before we get in past that to that target-rich environment of innocent people, or somewhere that's going to be caused a distraction for those people.
Right. And we're trying to set up a broad set of rules for a number of type scenarios. I know we've got some churches that might meet outside. There's all kinds of different layouts and everything. So we're just trying to give you some ideas of things to do. Not everything, your picture is going to be different in your head. So what I would encourage you to do is the tabletop. And some people it's training, some people it's not training, but tabletop talking is valuable. And that is to say, for instance, if somebody comes into your church, they seem off. There's something off about them. They've got that 1,000-year stare. and something happens, and all of a sudden they start crying, get up and go to the bathroom, and they're in there for 5 minutes, and nobody else is in the bathroom. What are you going to do? That's a tabletop. That's a, hey, well, and you get everybody's ideas, and you kind of kick around what would you do, and should we call 911? Start getting in front of this. I'm a believer that the mind won't go where the body, or the body won't go where the mind hasn't been. So take your mind there now. Learn from others. We just talked about West Freeway. That was not a great circumstance, obviously, because 2 men lost their lives. Well, 3, 2 responders there lost their lives in that. But I know Jack Wilson personally, and he will tell you, use that video to learn from it so that their death means something.
Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's learn from the successes and from the failures of others, so that we can create better response plans for ourselves. I get a lot of people ask me a question. They'll say, well, if this happens, or if it's home protection or church protection. And my answer is always the same, which is I can't give you that answer, because you have a picture in your head, and it's probably a little bit different than the picture that's in my head. So if I give you an answer, it's not going to be the right answer. What we can do is give you chess pieces and teach you how to play chess. So we're trying to give you a broad idea of how to harden your location up. And I think Nick, what he just laid out, has got merit and value, which is we stop them outside. If we can't stop them outside, we use our doors. And if the doors fail, we're into open spaces. So we're getting a little bit closer to this target-rich environment that we don't want them into. However, we need to be ready at all levels. So can you go a little bit more into the buffer? I think that might confuse them. What do you mean if we have a target-rich environment? What types of buffers could we have?
So when we talk about, like, they're past the doors, they're in the open air. What I mean by a buffer is a way to contact them before you get into the church or into the sanctuary or into a kid's area. We need to have a contact point, right? So like a line in the sand, if you will. So like they don't pass this line until one of our team contacts them.
Correct.
And we go over, again, we're not overbearing, right? We kill them with kindness, right? What we call all the time in our industry, verbal judo, right? So I'm being nice, I'm being courteous, but my eyes are constantly scanning. I'm looking for if they have any bulges of any kind that could be a weapon. I'm listening to what they're saying. I'm listening to how they're saying it. I'm looking at their body language and reading their facial expressions, but I'm also being nice. I'm introducing myself, or maybe I'm just a little bit closer, putting myself between that buffer, putting myself between that possible threat and the innocent. So even if I have safety team members or other greeters, right, that are still, again, having those conversations and those plans, that are somewhat trained in how to do that stuff, but then I'm really close by, so I don't create an overbearing kind of atmosphere. But even if that's the case, if they've gotten to that point and they're still questionable, right, and there's still something not right, I need to be up there so that they see me.
Right.
And that's that creating that visual deterrent, because if they still try to continue on and make it that past that point, there's other steps we'll take. But at least 99%, 98, 99% of all threats will then just turn around and leave.
Right.
They won't even come in.
And we'll use things when you're at that buffer stage to move resources. We'll have people moving cameras. We have one of the churches, we call it Go Joshua, where they'll have a made-up name that they'll say, hey, go grab this guy, Brian, blah, blah, blah. He might be able to talk to this guy, but what that means is call 911, let them know we have a problem, and get a unit en route. Because maybe we do see that bulge of that pistol, and we don't want to just go hands-on with them right at that exact moment because there's 40 people around us. So it's a chance to also get resources in place by setting up those personnel buffers in those areas. You're not only making that initial contact, which another de-escalation is the confidence that it shows to make that contact. To look somebody in the eyes and talk to them will take the fight out of a lot of people. To just stand right up to them, not to be aggressive, but just to say, I'm not afraid of you, I just want to talk to you, will a lot of times de-escalate that problem. So
yeah, and then we're not saying that, this is Texas, everybody's got a gun. We know that. We're not saying that. These are steps taken because there has been something along those lines from the outside to the inside that just doesn't seem right. Like something is not right with this person. There's something a little off, something like that. they walking up here by themselves, but they're having a conversation with somebody. They maybe something like that could be an issue. That's what we're talking about. So these are just some simple steps. We're going to get into a little bit more later on about now once they've gone, or we've at least seen that they're not a huge imminent threat at that point, and they get passed into the sanctuary. Then what do we do then to make sure we're keeping an eye on them?
Right.
So we'll try to get into that in the next episode or two. But I think that's going to be it for today.
Yeah, it was good.
It was good information, good conversation going back and forth. A lot of ideas, and I know sometimes it's overwhelming, water through a fire hose in a sense. But we feel that this type of thought process, this type of mindset needs to be put out. It needs to be said. It needs to be thought about. And just like David said, I think we get in the habit, especially in America, of living in our bubble, and we don't want to think about anything. So that if we don't think about it, then it doesn't exist.
Right.
But that we can't do that. We can't, because if you do that, you are absolutely going to become a victim, whether it be in church, outside, walking to your car, going to the grocery store, going to a school event, going anywhere and everywhere, large venue event. If you don't already start to have a kind of mindset on having a plan to respond or what to do, even if you don't have that protector mindset, the sheepdog mindset could be finding your talent. Your talent might be people reading. It might be like, oh man, that guy looks like he's in a bad mood. I don't know, something,
medical.
Right? But we're paying, medical, even more, right? Ooh, that guy's holding his chest. He's sweating really bad. He's looking pale. Maybe something along those lines. Who knows? But all of that can be used, right? It all can be used to have that mindset in order to protect others or save others, right? So again, not too much more of that, but we appreciate you guys tuning in and watching. Again, this is episode 4, so we're
getting there.
We're getting there. Yeah, we're moving along. Again, we're going to look for these on Sundays. We're going to try to post one out every Sunday to try to keep you guys in tune. And we're trying to stay on a structure so we can, you can go from one all the way down and try to build a program for yourselves, or reach out to us. We have a turnkey program with Sheepdog Defense Group in order to help you guys protect your churches. Not only that, but give you the authority to do that, right? The mentality, the authority, the training, which is even more important, not just some LTC with a gun that shot a paper target. I'm not saying you guys are like that, but if you are, maybe you need to consider about further training in order to respond correctly and to create possible innocence from getting hurt.
Right.
So, David,
if you're going to do something, do it right. Don't do it halfway. If you're going to do something, do it right. So no matter what that level is, if it's with us or with somebody else, but like Nick just said, just shooting a B-27 target a couple of times is not. I've never seen a piece of paper go in and create victims. A piece of paper is not your enemy. It's a human being that's going to come in and do harm. So being that mindset is a very hard thing to train. That's why we focused mindset for this podcast. So you guys keep training, keep up the hard work.
Yeah, and remember, all the information, if you guys have questions, our email, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. The podcast will be on YouTube, so look out for that stuff. Check us out, subscribe, all that stuff. If you have any questions, any concerns, or you're interested in a program, reach out to myself or David. And again, guys, keep training, keep fighting, and keep working. You guys stay safe.
See you next time.